Time to start.
You can make friends by moving in.
Hello, yeah, it's time, and we got the agenda today, so we will start now. Okay, so welcome to our IETF-Wide ALLDISPATCH BOF session, and I'm Shu Ping, and one of the co-chairs, and here together sitting with me is our co-chairs, and we also have other co-chairs online or on-site. And so this is a BOF session. And so if, in case you don't know, this is an experiment being run by IESG. And this is the third time. And so the main reason is to see whether we need such a central place for dispatching the work. So mainly about the art, SEC, and Gen, and also other areas. So please, if you could keep monitoring this session and provide your feedback after this and send that to IESD and to assist them to make decisions, that will be very much appreciated. Okay, so first note well, just if this is your first IETF, please do get to be familiar with those procedures, and because in IETF, and we do follow those processes, and so to get yourself to be familiar with this. And note really well, and it's very important for IETF, and we really care about this anti-harassment. And so if there is something concerning you, please let us know, and you will be taken care of. Okay, so some meeting tips, and since we are not the first session, and so just one thing, if you come to the MAC, please use the on-site tool and put your name there, and we will call you and based on the queue. So otherwise, there is know your name. Okay, because this is a dispatch session, and please, when you come to the MAC to comment, and please focus on the dispatch questions. And that will be your first sentence. And since it's very tight this time, and please, we need to be focused. And basically, you could have that to direct the work to the existing working group, or propose to create a new one, or a BOF, or AD sponsored, or some additional discussions might be needed, or it is not appropriate for IETF. Okay, so this is our agenda, and it's quite full. And so anybody has any questions on the agenda? Okay, so if not, we can start our session.
Emphasize the time limits.
Yes, so we already put that in our email. So in this session, that will be 5 minutes for the presenter and 5 minutes for the people who comment. Okay, so we will keep the time sharp. Thank you.
And please, the next presenter that's coming up, please be ready to jump up here when the previous one finishes so that we don't lose time that way.
Okay, next slide. Here to talk about 2 drafts.
Yeah.
There we go. So why do we do this? 2026, which is the Internet Standards Process V3, and 2418, which is Working Group Procedures. Together, they've had dozens of updates and errata. We wanted to get 2 documents that reflected all of the IETF consensus changes. In other words, if it wasn't in, pardon me, if it wasn't in an update 2026 or 2014 RFC, or if it wasn't a simple editorial fix in the errata, we didn't do it. Unclear if the IETF wants to do another poised. That was a thing that split off the IAB responsibilities and did all these documents originally. I think it's pretty clear that we don't want to do it, but don't have the the fortitude to do it. But even if we do, we need a unified document that does it, that explain, rolls up all of the updates. 2026 was actually more current than 2040-18. More on that later. Next slide. Acknowledgements does always appear at the end. Nobody reads that far. So these are the people who helped cause this thing. Yeah, you can read them when you look at the slides. Next. Okay, so 2026 BIS, what we did, converted it to Markdown, posted a draft, filtered out the outdated RFCs. In other words, if RFC 3214 is obsoleted by 5426, we didn't bother to do 3214. So we applied the change for each draft, posted it for each RFC, posted a new draft. All of that is above the line in terms of that's all IETF consensus. Below the line are changes we made that we think the community wants. We removed the intellectual property rights section because it is documented in, God, I sound like the old joke. 5378 and 8179 instead. We posted a new draft. We then went through all the errata, applied the changes that were still relevant. Many of them were not because section 10 is now gone. And then we posted a new draft. So all told, I think there were 13 drafts of 2026 BIS. Next. Feedback and next steps. We got one email from a guy named Tim McSweeney, who was, some of you may remember. It was all about the terminology section. I'll just say he has a very unique take on vocabulary that I think his comment includes. Can the IETF even have a chair? Okay. Next steps, it would be nice if someone verified our work, went through all the drafts, compared them to the original. I know I'm right, so I know we're right, so it doesn't matter. I think AD sponsor is the place to go for this, run the process just to get consensus, if only on the last two parts, and publish a unified RFC that updates 2026 and the dozen other RFCs and closes 8 errata, I think. Do you want to talk? Should I do both? Or you want to answer the dispatch? Yeah, but.
Well, have you done both?
No, I've only done 2026, which is the easy one, which is
Okay.
here's what I think we should do is next.
Why don't you go ahead with the next one?
Okay.
And we'll have the discussion.
2418. Next slide, please. Followed the same process, converted to Markdown, submitted a draft. It is a lot easier to convert NROF than XML to Markdown. Enough said. A lot easier. For all of the RFCs that updated, we applied the changes. There was one, the ombuds team definition, 7776. We got wording help from Adrian because it didn't actually specify specific changes to make. It just said, here's the new order. And it seems like we should put that into the working group procedures about who the ombuds team is. For all of the updating RFCs, again, apply the changes, post a new draft, review the errata, same thing as the 2026. Pick the changes that are still relevant, post a new draft. I think in this case, there were 10 drafts posted. Next. 2048 BIS needs more work. There are many things missing. Tim posted, why am I drawing a blank on his last name? Anyhow, the charter doesn't have a privacy or security considerations, the sample charter that's in the document. It talks about telephony over IP. We can probably find something more current. Clarification is needed around other roles like working group facilitator, working group enabler, whatever. But see 9381, which lists the entities involved in the process. It still talks about mailing things to agenda@ietf.org. An open issue, how much we think we need to get detailed in the tooling or just say make the agenda known, et cetera, using the current set of tooling. 8717 says use managing director, secretariat everywhere, but that's clearly wrong. IETF does have an executive director, Jay's here somewhere. So that has to be fixed, or 8717 needs a BIS, or I don't care. The whole section on internet drafts is outdated. It talks about various indices and expunging and when things get deleted and so on. So that all has to be updated. There is a reference to a non-existent conflict of interest in some RFC that doesn't exist. Okay, next slide. What I think should happen, I think the points that I just mentioned are important. There are probably others. This was just from a quick read of Tim Lisinski, remember it, and me. IETF consensus on the resolution of those things is important. Mod Pod was going to be a black hole at the time this was written, but apparently it's going to be smooth sailing, according to the co-chair. Maybe we do AD sponsored and have a design team to just answer the factual questions up to this group, I guess. Next. That's it. So.
Okay, Murray's first in the queue.
It's my impression that the community at large prefers not to have stuff like this sponsored. They would rather have working groups develop it. Just for given all the things that I have AD sponsored lately that have, well, not a large list, but procedural type things where we have tried to put them through under AD sponsored, there's been massive resistance, or at least a small number of very loud people resisting the idea of us doing them. So I'm kind of surprised to see that the request for AD sponsored here. I'd rather see this done with a charter. And that's as an individual, not as an area director.
Okay. Am I calling on people?
Mira?
All right, Miria?
Yeah, Mia Kulevin. So this sounds like you want to make more than just update the things that are obvious and are outdated. You actually want to also talk about certain changes, maybe because things are just updated and we have another process now. But like if it's more than just getting it up to date, I think we need a working group.
Hi, Sean Turner. I guess I wrote one of the documents that updated 2026. Thank you for doing this. I will volunteer to review to make sure that stuff gets done. So. Woo-hoo.
Any comments from Roman, maybe?
Hi, Roman Danilou, Gen AD. I was waiting for the community to provide kind of more feedback. I'm a little bit like Murray, and not speaking kind of as an individual, I feel like reopening some of these documents, even for what seems like an editorial change, would require potentially community discussion, would benefit from a lot of eyes and the structure that would come from a focused, narrowly focused working group. So I would not be so excited to do kind of a sponsor. I would like to make sure that all those in the community get eyes on this, and I feel like that would be best done with a focused working group in Gen.
Do you think the community will participate before the working group does working group last call?
I don't have insight on that. I would aspire that, given how sweeping and cross-cutting and important these documents are in documenting processes for literally every working group, that there would be participation to help you and the editorial team kind of through the process. I guess this would also be a good time if there are others that feel like changes should be made to some of these other documents and you have appetite, this would be a good time to kind of signal that you potentially want to talk more than just some of these editorial changes here.
Any other comments? And Lars, you should probably start heading up here.
David SKazi, as Roman points at me aggressively. I had this draft last time about milestones, and Roman points out that if we do a working group for these kind of things that are pretty tightly focused, because like the milestones doc would be an update to 2418. It could be done as part of this work. So if we were to do that in a working group, I think it might be good to get the charter slightly bigger so we can do some things like that. Though I think we'll have a hard time figuring out where that bound is, but I think that's what we need to do anyway. I think this is too big, no matter how we slice it, to do AD sponsored.
Okay.
Okay.
I think
Thank you.
We've got the answer for now. Lars, are you here somewhere? Yeah. Ah, there you are. And enter stage right.
Yeah, thank you. There's a huge room back there, by the way, if anybody's up here. And this room has distinct Geneva ITU vibes, I'm just saying. Anyway, I'm not ITF chair anymore, which means I have time for things like this. So when I became chair, I realized there's a bunch of stuff that the chair needs to do that isn't really sort of super well described. And I found myself at times quite overloaded because there's all of these different roles and obligations. And then I realized that there's not a lot in the original IFC, some of which Rich just talked about, that actually really define what the chair does and has to do, but there's some small sentences that sort of limit you in, for example, not being able to delegate anything. I thought it would be nice if we maybe gave the future chairs the flexibility to delegate some parts of the role. Next slide. So as I just said, there's a whole bunch of things that the IETF chair sort of needs to do, and the list keeps growing as of last count. You chair the IETF, you chair the ISG, you're Gen AD, you are responsible for enforcing you are the contact point for code of conduct violations. You're an IB member, you are an LLC board member by default, you're an RSEP member by default, you appoint a bunch of teams and then also manage them, and you own some directorates and kind of need to pay attention. So there's a lot, and I'm sure we're going to find more things. And none of these things are easily delegatable. There's a few exceptions. The ISG can find somebody else for the LLC board, which in my opinion doesn't make sense. It needs to be the chair. And on the RSEP, you can also find somebody else. But all the other ones are basically, you know, the chair and nobody else. And after I published the first version of this, we sort of realized by looking at the old RFCs, we also don't actually foresee the chair getting incapacitated. So the only thing we can do if, like, you know, the chair is in the hospital or something like that is a midterm vacancy reappointment by the NomCom, which takes at least 6 weeks. And throughout that time, there's a bunch of things only the chair sort of can do following the RFCs that might leave us in a bit of a pickle. So there's two things this draft now does, and we can have a conversation about whether they should be split or not. So the second thing is we are sort of instantiating a fallback emergency stand-in succession for the IETF chair. Next slide. Right, so one thing we're doing in this draft, or I'm doing in this draft, is we're going to change just a few lines in some of the old RFCs that allow basically the IETF chair to not also be the ISG chair, and the IETF chair to not also be an IB member, and the IETF chair not also be the Gen AD. And I specifically don't want these to be decoupled if the chair at the time feels like they really want to fill all these roles, but at least want to give future chairs the ability to say, well, you know, I find the role, for example, of an IB member is something that I would like to have somebody else do. And we can have a conversation about whether this somebody else should then also be an area director or what have you. But at least I want to, the high level bit is give the chair the opportunity to prioritize things and delegate things like you might do in your company or your day job, which the IETF chair can't really do. And on the emergency stand-in side, it's a pretty straightforward proposal. We're saying if the IETF chair becomes incapacitated, the IB chair will automatically assume the role. And if the IB chair is unable, we don't say why they would be unable, maybe they just can't do it, it falls to the chair of the LLC. And we felt like that's enough of a safety net. And if all of that fails, we have bigger problems. Next slide. Right, so my feeling is this should be AD sponsored because obviously I don't want a working group, like nobody ever wants a working group here, but that would be my proposal. Thanks.
Okay, Ted Hardy is first in the queue.
Thanks very much. For the dispatch question, I think this deserves a working group, and I apologize, Lars, for saying publish as AD sponsored really doesn't work here, because I think there are some questions here that you've raised that actually have bigger implications that maybe don't need to be dealt with by delegation. A great example is your IEB one. The IEB currently has a liaison from the ISG as well as the chair, so it could be that the decision of the group of the IETF is that maybe we don't need two of those, and we have a liaison in each direction, and that this making one the member of the other is a legacy of a time we don't need to keep. So I think these are interesting and important questions, but I think a working group would be needed to hash them out. And there is an unfortunate set of interactions with the other work that was just discussed. So I think the unfortunately obvious thing is to make that a little less clean and to put this document in charter for that working group if and when it gets created. Thanks.
Yeah, first, thank you. Second, damn it. And yeah, I agree. If we create a group that touches the rich presentation, this is close enough that we can probably finagle a charter that, you know, makes that in charter, but nothing else, unless we find something else today that we want to put there. But thank you. That's a good suggestion.
Okay, Michael St. John's.
Mike St. John's. Hi. I have a vague recollection that this was actually discussed as part of the NomCom mess redo 10, 12 years ago, maybe longer than that. Jim Galvin can probably point that out. There is some interactions with NomCom with what you're talking about because of that whole set of things. So you may actually want to try and think about, do we also want to sweep that in? Hate to do it, but I think what Ted is saying is a working group is a better choice than an AD document here. On the other hand, let me say two things. One, the IEB already has a process for replacing somebody temporarily. They just elect one. And that's the only piece of that problem that you were talking about that I don't think is a problem. So.
All right, thank you. Mirja?
I think we need to separate these two things that you already presented separately. So the part where you need a fallback option every time an RFC says the IETF chair has to decide this and the IETF chair is not able to decide it, we need somebody else to make a decision, but that doesn't mean this person has to be an interim IETF chair. Just we need to make sure we are not stalled. And that's a good change, which is very straightforward. And maybe it might be you can call this person an interim IETF chair, but I don't think you have to. The other question, to delegate things, needs more discussion, because I think there is a benefit of having like these roles in the same person, and like it needs more community discussion. But I thought the way we've been handling it so far, and maybe we didn't do it consequently, is like, for example, on the IAB, the IETF chair is an IAB member. I think that's important. But there's also the liaison. So if the IAB chair, the IETF chair doesn't show up to all the meetings and whatever, it's not a problem. There's another person there. So you can still kind of decide your own priorities and nothing fails here. And I think that's the better model.
So yes and no, in a sense. So I agree that the succession or the stand-in part, maybe there's other ways to handle it, although I think there's benefits of that being like the same person and not like 5 different persons for the 5 different bodies, but let's put that aside. For the delegation, ideally, I agree. It makes total sense that it's like one person in the IETF chair and they should do everything. In practice, there are scaling problems because even if in a good week you can do all of these roles, not all weeks are good. And specifically, you know, I for example, didn't feel like the IB, for example, right? Even if I didn't want to participate there, I would have made myself appealable by saying I'm going to ignore my IB member role and I'm just not going to show up and vote.
Can we focus on the dispatch?
And so
question?
I think it's not as easy as saying you can already do this, because I think you could actually get appeal over this.
All right, let's not try and solve the problem here. Let's try and
All right.
figure out where we're going to solve the problem.
To answer the dispatch question, I think the second part where you just need a fallback, we could actually do a desponsored, or we could add it to a working group if we have one. For the first part, I'm not even sure we have a problem. We need more discussion about the problem itself.
Okay.
David SKazi.
Delegation enthusiast, ever since I became a manager some number of years ago. I think you've isolated a real problem. I think we can come up with real solutions. And to the dispatch question, I think we should have a working group. I'm starting to sense a formation of a, superpoised or whatever you want to call it. But I think a working group for these various things that is tightly scoped to updating the documents with a few like explicitly listed changes that are decided at chartering seems like the best approach.
Thank you. Francesca.
Francesca Palombini, relaying Robert Sparks. I would really prefer that we don't lump this and Rich's work into the same group. This has a much higher chance of finishing first, and I have to say +1.
Just saying more gen ADs means more reason for delegating the gen area. AD role.
Roman.
Hi, Roman. I just wanted to quickly say, I would of course not AD sponsor this, since this would be in a position of constraining the powers of the roles that I have, and that would be inappropriate as a conflict of interest. So I leave it to other ADs if they would like to step up to AD sponsor this, or a working group.
Would you feel comfortable chartering a working group though? Because you kind of have to if we decide that we're going to go that way.
I would be willing to do a working group. We should do a little bit of the dance to figure out whether we have a super working group around processes or to split it apart based on the feedback previously done though.
And if you do feel uncomfortable, you can always recuse on the balloting, and hopefully there will be enough green that it goes through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Jesse Carter talking about high assurance DIDs with DNS.
Oh, is this one coming through okay?
We can hear you.
Awesome. Okay, excellent. So thanks everybody for your time and consideration. My name's Jesse. I work for CIRA. I'm one of the co-authors of our draft high assurance DIDs with DNS. Our other co-authors are Jacques Latour from CIRA, Tim Boma from the Digital Governance Council, and Mathieu Glode from Northern Bloc. In the interest of time, I'll just jump right into it. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Next slide. Can you do the next slide?
So for a very brief technical overview, what we've tried to do here is integrate DNS and DNSSEC with decentralized identifiers known as DIDs. In short, a DID is a URI that through some resolution mechanism denoted by the DID method will resolve to a JSON file. That JSON file contains metadata surrounding that identifier. So that could be PKI, that could be service endpoints, that could be a variety of other things. And those JSON files can exist on, back one slide, yeah, awesome. So those JSON files can exist on web servers or other content delivery systems. Basically what we've wanted to do and focused on is for web-based decentralized identifiers or DIDs, how can we enhance the security and assurance level? So we integrated DNS and DNSSEC. What we've done is signed the JSON document using a verification method. So a piece of PKI expressed by that DID document. And then we've mapped that PKI into the DNS through a TLSA record and mapped the DID itself, which is a URI, into the DNS as a URI record. This effectively maps the domain to the DID and creates a strong binding, as well as replicating the information across two segregated domains. Next slide, please. So our motivation for this is Jacques and I, working at CIRA, which is the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, have been using DNS and DNSSEC for a long time. And what we wanted to do and have always thought about was novel and interesting ways to use DNS and DNSSEC for new technologies. And what we kind of discovered was using this in this pattern, we could enable a bunch of cool stuff with domain names. So instead of just having a website using that domain name, you can now do things like issue credentials or sign things by using this pattern. And you have an increased level of assurance by linking the DNS to the information contained in that DID document. So basically what we've tried to do is bridge older technology with the new world of decentralized identity and credentials. And it does a bunch of things. It makes it more flexible. It's relatively technologically agnostic. It increases discoverability. It enhances assurance. And it's leveraging multi-stakeholder governed internet infrastructure, which is well supported and long-lived. Next slide, please. So in terms of background, we've received a lot of interest in our work on this. Primarily, the Department of Homeland Security is quite interested in our work. We've done a bunch of work with them behind the scenes, and they're developing some other stuff that isn't yet public. But the main thing they've done is they've released a document called their Requirements for Decentralized Identity, which is a trust architecture. It references our work heavily and is actually the basis for the design and ideas behind it. Our friends at the BC government have created a new DID method called DID TDW, or Trusted Web. It leverages a lot of the same patterns and directly interoperates with our work. We've also started a working group at the Trust Over IP Foundation called the High Assurance Verifiable Identifier Task Force, which also uses our draft as the basis for the work going on there. Kind of on the DHS note is what they're doing is trying to use the .gov domain to sign and issue credentials on their behalf. Basically, the intuition there was that you can take a trusted domain name and turn it into a trusted identifier and perform cryptographic interactions like sign and verify documents and credentials. Next slide, please. So lots of people want to advance this work. We've received lots of interest from organizations like DIF, W3C, and the OpenID Foundation. We think this leans heavily, and it depends entirely on DNS and DNSSEC technologies, like TLSA, DANE, and URI records. So we do hope there's a home within the IETF for this. As we mentioned, governments and public authorities interested in national ID initiatives like EIDAS or MDLs have expressed interest in this, and it also brings in existing X509 work and PKI by kind of bridging these ecosystems. And the last slide, please. So ultimately, our preferred outcome would hopefully be adopted or directed to an existing working group. We've asked around and haven't found an obvious home for us yet, so we've been directed to ALLDISPATCH to provide our work. It's important to note that Brian Newbold, who's the co-author of the AT proto, also has 2 drafts at the IETF as well. One is an independent and one is in DNS op that lean heavily and are very similar to the work we're doing. So there might be reason to start a working group there. And potentially, if we don't think there's enough, then holding a BOF to see where we end up could also be valid. Thank you for your time.
Okay, Martin Thompson.
Yeah, Martin Thompson. You have talked to the W3C working groups on this one, because I'm going to suggest that you take that work there. There's some questions here that I have that relate to DIDs and the interaction of DIDs with other things, and the resolution methods and that sort of things that make me think that the complicated pieces of this work is W3C work and not IETF work. I think your use of existing technology that the IETF has defined is probably strictly in the we're just using this stuff on the assumption that it works. Whereas the interactions with DIDs and resolution methods, I think, is probably the more complicated piece of this, and would benefit from their expertise rather than the expertise of this organization, which has basically zero interaction with DIDs.
Understood.
Richard Barnes.
What Martin just said was exactly what I was in queue to say.
Any other comments? Jesse, I assume that you've also seen the commentary in the email chat about this as well. I think it was also suggesting W3C.
Yeah.
I'm sort of channeling that.
Yep, I'm hearing that as well.
And Ecker is in the queue now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to double down on the W3C thing. I think I said this in my email, but yeah, I don't think IETF should take this up unless there's some very strong evidence W3C wants to take this up. This is exactly you get into trouble with other SDOs by doing things in their zone without really consulting them.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone that would like to comment in terms of that we should do this in IETF someplace, or is kind of the consensus that W3C is a better home? And I'm not seeing any hands or queue entries. Okay.
One further comment, if you don't mind, on our side is we are asking to reserve some node names within IANA, _DID specifically. Would that have any impact on this?
I believe the existing procedures in the various places will allow for registrations from outside of the IETF. If anything does need to come to the IETF, then you can work that out, but I think we'll be right.
Understood.
Okay, thank you.
Next up is Theo Deos on Alpha 2.0, language for authentication. Sorry, authorization.
Yeah, hi. I'm Theo, and I'm relatively new to IETF, although I have been following for many, many years. I'm presenting now some information about Alpha together with one of the co-authors, David Brossard, CTO of Axiomatics. I also work for the University of Kent and Huawei in Germany, where I lead a research lab. Next slide, please. Very quickly, Alpha is an equivalent, semantically equivalent language to XACML, so one of the more advanced authorization languages, although as I will explain, Alpha, by allowing obligatory statements, also has elements of protocol control from the point of view of having proactive actions rather than passive acts control. There are many authorization languages, most of them introduced for the purposes of customer retention and stickiness as opposed to interoperability. And there are very few standards, and there is a warning there about too many standards. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Alpha has been around more or less at the same as long as Auth2 and has followed an initial maturation within Oasis as a way, initially conceived as a way of helping people understand XACML and developers and architects write and validate XACML policies. Now, what we found in the process is that we can natively evaluate Alpha very effectively, and I will show a few results about this in my next slide. But we also found that it helps balance machine and humans. It helps reuse and interoperability, and also avoids stickiness. And what we want to do with Alpha 2 is get rid of the translation to XACML and have the performance results and benefits of native evaluation, and also simplify it a little bit, and I will explain how. Next slide, please. So there are already a number of users, most of them using them as a front end to XACML, but in my lab in Huawei in Munich, and also a UK company called Rock Solid Knowledge, we have both of us different, architecturally different, but interoperable implementations of Alpha that are native. In our case, we have extended also for users control. Let's move on to the next one, please. Because in the next one, I want to highlight why, in my view, IETF makes sense. It makes sense as opposed to Oasis for a number of reasons. Alpha, and as I have evidence out of my own practical experience with that, can be very efficient and very small, and with a very small computational print, both in terms of evaluation time, memory, and also the size of the policies. It allows policy combinations, which helps with resolving conflicts in real time with without a lot of complexity, and it also allows for combining policies from multiple different authors, which is particularly useful if you want to have policies in a compute continuum where you want to have compatibility of policies running on devices, running on network or network nodes on the edge and in the cloud and data spaces. Also, because we have used this and validated this for executing some of the data space protocols, we know that for things such as data usage control, that makes sense. So from that point of view, my personal feeling is that IETF guidance and IETF perspective on this would help more than other, perhaps more enterprise-focused groups in that could be hosts of Alpha. There is also interoperability tests that are happening in OpenAIRE at the same time. So these are my questions. To the point, David had in IETF 120 an initial presentation at Auth. Then they suggested that we go to Dispatch. because of the overlap with a number of different elements. Alpha is a policy language. It is about control. You can use it for authorization. You can use it about controlling actions that effectively have to do with the execution of protocols. The fact that we can combine policies from different authors and the fact that we are that's very lightweight and efficient, I think that makes it useful across a number of different working groups. So my obvious question is, how do we do that?
Okay, thank you. PHP.
Yeah, I like this work, but my question is why IETF rather than Oasis? I mean, I would much prefer to do this in Oasis.
I will give you a personal opinion, and I have to emphasize that this is not discussed with all the co-authors. My personal view is that IETF or communities like IETF will steer in an efficient, lightweight implementation and keep it there. And my concern is that Oasis, in addition to the XACML package or because of the XACML history, may in fact lead it or keep force or allow a lot of complexity to be maintained that would not be fit for purpose in my opinion.
All right, several people in the chat said that this kind of sounded like a BOF sort of thing. Any other comments?
Sorry, can you?
A BOF is a birds of a feather session in a future event.
I would be open to that, to be honest. I think that is a reasonable comment. For me, the most important thing is that we progress with the community engaged and with appropriate guidance. The fact that we already have a number of different implementations, I think that shows a level of maturity. But of course, the real maturity comes with community engagement and with scrutiny.
All right, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron Parecki. Just because you have it on the list of questions, should it be part of OAuth? I don't necessarily speak for the entire group, but we already have a completely packed agenda for 3 sessions this week, and I don't think we can handle any more drafts that are this large in scope.
Any other comments? Well, I think maybe a BOF session might also help to answer the question about here or Oasis. So that is an option. And somebody's coming in the mic that isn't in the queue. Please speak your name.
Paul.
Paul Waters, AD, security AD. So I think maybe it's worth doing a BOF in the security area and see where it goes from there. So that's definitely possible. I think if there is a BOF, it would probably be in the security area, right?
Makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Only perhaps before I leave, only one comment. Although I would agree with that, I will also, with the security area, I would also like to highlight the fact that because of the obligation statements and the style of the language, perhaps people who are interested in policies also for the control layer maybe would be benefited by having a look.
Yeah, I mean, if it's in security, we cross over areas a lot here, so.
Thank you.
All right, and Dan Wing is remotely presenting the next session.
Hello, I'm Dan. We have a draft here written by Tira Reddy and Mohammed Boukader. This is about connecting securely to servers in the home network. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the sorts of servers we're talking about here are your printer, your NAS, an IoT thing like a thermostat, any sort of a Windows machine running SMB, a Mac running SMB, so temporary sort of devices, permanent sort of devices like printers. And what we found when trying to set these up is it's difficult to use Acme to get certificates signed. The firewall rules and NAT and not having a public IP address due to carrier grade NAT are all hindrances to that, as well as picking a domain name and administering that or getting it from your ISP. And then when you change your ISP, having all of your in-home devices not work the same way they did. And then other mechanisms which have been deployed by a couple of companies rely on the vendor to continue to exist and continue to support the product. So those don't rely on Acme to do certificate signing at the customer premise, but instead rely on the vendor to do the signing sort of on behalf of the device that's in the user's home. So when that vendor goes out of business or loses interest in that product, the product no longer gets this feature functionality, and it sort of devolves. And we've seen this happen in the press with cars, and of course it happens with things that are cheaper like IoT and printers and NAS. So we wrote this document to talk about the requirements in existing solutions. Next slide, please. So today, users have to trust the self-signed certificate that your printer will by default create, your router will by default create, and other devices will by default create. And this self-signed certificate encourages harmful security practices, click OK to continue. And the user doesn't understand when and why they get re-prompted for this. So then when there is some misconfiguration, they're not at home, for example, but they think they are, and they're connecting to a different printer, they get these sorts of challenges and do the wrong thing in the sense of now they click OK to continue, and then they enter a password that is now stolen and can be misused. Existing IETF solutions are either not well documented or not embraced by the vendors and not embraced by the users to get all this stuff sort of set up. And all of this came out of ADD. So in ADD, we're trying to set up secure connections to encrypted DNS forwarders. So basically doing DNS over TLS or DNS over HTTPS to your DNS server in your house in order to get its caching and get its security features and functionality, such as turning off kids access or restricting kids access or whatever. And trying to get that working and set up to a device that, again, has all these same sorts of constraints. It's behind a NAT, it's potentially behind a carrier grade NAT, and we want all that to work. Next slide, please. So a summary of what we have in the current document, we have a list of requirements, and then an analysis in a table and a brief textual description of all the different solutions that we have seen both in the market and in standards for how to approach this, how we might solve these sorts of problems. Not all the requirements are necessarily achievable. They're goals. So perhaps desired outcomes or something might be a better terminology to have used for that. But this is what we have in the document today. And our main point is the existing state of the art is preventing us from getting secure connections to home servers. And we want to have secure connections to home servers, but the existing state of the art is holding us back. And that's all I have for presentation. Next slide, please. So our recommendation is to hold a full BOF just based on the discussions we have had in the ADD working group, which of course is just ADD. But the interest seems large. The problem seems significant and may need the amount of time and energy of a BOF to fully investigate and drill into this. Let's go for some Q&A.
All right, Cullen.
Cullen Jennings, I think this is like really important problem that we should have solved long ago, and I support the BOF approach to it because I think it'll be very hard to convince people that we should charter any work for this before we have a little bit of discussion of it. It's possible to solve the problem, and that will help scope the problem. And that seems like exactly the right type of use case for a BOF. So I'm very supportive of this. Thanks.
And Schwartz.
Hey, I'm supportive of a non-working group forming BOF here. I think this is like a very interesting topic that's worth our time. But I think that we're really at a very fuzzy stage of figuring out what the problem even is. Like the ADD use case that we're talking about is DNS configuration. That doesn't involve any like web pages or browsers or like users navigating to a resource. That's totally about configuring the platform, the client platform itself, to securely connect to something that the user otherwise never sees. That's quite different from like interacting with the router console, where I'm going to pull up a configuration pane, maybe in a browser. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ecker.
Yeah, so it seems like we're all kind of in agreement on the technical situation, which is that no one knows what to do. A BOF feels like yes minister thinking. We must do something. This is something. Everyone must do this. I'd like to see some demonstration. There's actually a problem that anybody understands how to solve that is going to be solved before we do anything at all here. There's an enormous amount of thinking here. Martin Thompson has a great document on this. As far as I can tell, it's gotten zero uptake in actual practice. I wish people I realize people wish to solve this problem, and I actually wish to solve this problem. I don't think that means that we're going to solve this problem, and I don't think that a BOF is particularly helpful to address that issue. I'd like to see a document which describes that solution.
So, Ecker, just to make sure I understood your comment, so you're saying skip the BOF and just go straight to a working group?
Absolutely not. I'm saying.
I'm glad I asked that.
No, I think this is an unsolved research problem, and should be until there is evidence of an actual solution, should be pointed to the IRTF.
Great, thank you. Glendine.
Yeah, hi there, Glendine, Comcast, NBC Universal. This is a problem that's been bouncing around inside the ADD working group, which I'm the co-chair of, for quite a while now. And we have, I think, tried to frame it in ways to make it hopefully addressable. I think that the right approach here is to do a BOF so that we can bring together different minds and views that would hopefully create a well-defined problem statement and maybe a charter for a future working group to tackle solving this problem, which keeps coming up. So it's not like it's an abstract theoretical problem. It keeps coming up in things we want to do to move things forward with work here at the IETF. So I support doing a BOF.
Okay, PHP.
Yeah, I think that a BOF will be a good idea, and I think that eventually going into IRTF would be a good idea. And I'm very glad to hear that everybody is saying that this is an impossible to solve problem, because I've got running code. The issue here is not whether there is a solution. The question is whether there is a solution that meets the set of arbitrary constraints other people want to put around it. I.e., yes, I think I have a solution. You might not like it. And you might not like it because maybe my solution doesn't involve using ICANN DNS. Maybe my solution doesn't involve using CAs. And so let's not say that it's impossible. Let's just say that you don't like the solutions.
Okay, thank you. Paul Wouters.
Paul Wouters, speaking as an individual. So this feels to me like there's quite some overlap with an old working group we had, HomeNet, where we're trying to do partially the same thing, right? You've got the accessing devices within your house from within your house, and you got the access your devices in your house when you're not at home. And I think that you'll also get a lot of pushback against businesses who've made a serious business model of getting monthly income from you for services that you obtain from them, from the devices in your house, to talk to their appliance servers out on the net so that you can reach them. And so I think I'm in the camp with Ecker. Like, if you want to do something, we first really need to research something, because I don't think the market is going to be really helpful with us here to deploy something.
Okay, thank you. And then very quickly, because we're over time, Eric?
Yeah, Eric Ving, the responsibility for ADD. So thank you for moving this away from ADD. That's superb. I'm supporting working group forming both because I think the requirements are well known, the solution is completely unknown. So we got the framework. So working group forming both.
Okay, well, it seems like the consensus is some sort of a BOF. It seems to be somewhat split between working group forming and not working group forming, but we can work that out as it were. And we can't actually dispatch things to IRTF, but can certainly talk to them about it.
Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me correctly?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Gilles Leeman from Telecom Sud Paris in France. I'm a researcher, and I will talk about the update of the RFC 4765 incident detection message exchange format. And Hervé Debar, who is the author, one author of this RFC, might be online with us. Next slide, please. So the idea of IDMFV2 is to define a data representation for security events. The big difference with the initial IDMFV1 is that instead of being only cyber, we have included physical incident. So the format is totally agnostic. It can be used in a SIM environment or physical SIM environment or a combined environment and even with a monitoring system. The idea is that now that everything is half cyber, half physical, and everything is merged, you can easily correlate different type of incident thanks to this format. Next slide, please. So the background is quite large because we've been working on it for 2 or 3 years now. So first there is the first version V1, which we learn a lot about, and we try to improve the concept. So now there is 2 drafts, one about the format, which is the most important, and another one, the transport on HTTPS, which is really not very complicated. We have a website with a lot of information since 2023. We have a mailing list with approximately 60 members, but it's not very, very active yet. We're waiting on the decision of IETF before really starting it. Next slide, please. We already have made quite a lot of code. There is a complete SIM prototype implementing IDMFV2. It's based on an open source project on IDMFV1, so that's why it's quite complete. Already Python and Java libraries to use the format, online JSON validator for the IDMFV2 message, and we've already tried. We created and tried the format on a research project last year. So it's been used maybe 2 years in a real situation by about 20 partners using cyber and physical probes. And now we are working on a new project. Safe4SOC is security standard alert format exchange for SOCs, where we are still working on the format. And there is another project, Atlantis, using the format for physical and cyber protection. Next slide. So what needs to be done now? The format and the transport are well defined. They've been tested on a scale. So that's one part which is done. Now we are entering the tuning phase. So it's probably the most complicated because we have to work on the format, on the attributes, make compromise, etc. So we really need testing in real world settings. That's why we are producing so much code. So we will be doing this test in our project, but of course, we are interested by more expertise in cybersecurity detection, physical incident detection, and the best is the combined cyber and physical detection. The only deadline we have is to finish the job before the end of 2026, because then there won't be anyone to finish it after in 2027. Last slide, please. So the option was either to reactivate maybe the intrusion detection working group. There is a mistake here. So now it's not intrusion detection anymore. It's incident detection, which is larger than just intrusion detection. So either reuse this working group if there are enough people interested in IETF. If there are only few people interested, we can go for AD sponsored and keep the work outside of IETF. And if people are interested, they can join us. And if necessary, have additional discussion. Direct the work to an existing working group is not a good thing, and recommendation starting from a full BOF is not an option, as we have done so much work already. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Arnaud, first comment.
Hello, yes. Hi, Arnaud Tadei, Broadcom. So I'm very surprised that there is no mention in this work to the OCSF work, the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework. And I think there is duplication of work with a work item in study group 17, x.icd schemas. So I would like to better understand the gap analysis of this one versus other works. Thank you.
Okay, I'm learning about this OCSCF, so I have to check. But I have no answers right now.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I just wanted to be the last one, so if anyone else was planning on speaking up, but I guess not. Okay, Paul Out is speaking as the AD this time. So when you approached us first, I looked into who's actually using the V1 version. And even though I can find quite a bunch of links on Wikipedia and other places, I couldn't personally find when I asked around my colleagues and my relationships that people are actually using this in the security systems currently. So I'm a little worried that with the V1 not being used a lot, that I wouldn't want to spend too many resources on doing a V2 in the IETF. And so if we would do anything here, I would definitely also say, like, let's do AD sponsoring and not do a BOF or anything, because that will take too many resources. But I would, before committing to AD sponsoring this, I would definitely want to see more of are people actually going to use it? And the previous comment apparently is also that there might be alternatives available already that people use instead. So, so reluctantly, maybe we can do AD sponsor.
Okay. About just one word about IDMF V1. Yeah, it has been used because I was project manager of a SIM implementing IDMF V1, but there are so many competition in the field that it was not the only one. And really, we tried to learn lessons about IDMF V1, which was very complicated, as we really choose something more simple with IDMF V2. But I'm fine with AD sponsors if there is not something already existing. It's fine for me.
Okay. Oh, Ecker's in the queue now. Go ahead.
Yes, because I didn't realize Paul was going to open the AD sponsor box. I would object to having this be AD sponsored. This seems to have overlap with IETF work. I certainly don't think we should take something that is like a zillion pages and publish it as a standard document via AD sponsor at this time. Just to remind people, AD sponsored even for informational requires consensus. So it's not just like a matter of like this is like something somebody did. So be prepared for me to object to it when it comes up for consensus.
Right. So, thank you, Eka. Paul speaking. So the V1 is an IETF document, right? You know that, right? Or
yes.
No, I'm talking to Eka.
Sorry.
I think I had picked up on that, but I don't think that changes my opinion.
Okay, that's fair. I just want to clarify that it's not about bringing new work in. It is about updating an existing document. It might not be used, but like it is an existing RFC.
Fair enough. As you say, I hadn't picked up on that, but it doesn't change my opinion.
Okay, I think that covers it. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Aaron is next. Where's Aaron? Ah, entering stage right.
Hi, Aaron Paraki, also presenting here on behalf of Atul and Apurva, who are remote, I believe. Go ahead. So some background here, the SEC event working group was active from 2016 to June of last year, published 4 RFCs in that time. Quick description of the RFCs because the proposed ones build on them. Next slide. The next slide, please. So the push delivery RFC defines a mechanism to deliver a single security event to a receiver. It is sending a JSON web token. Go ahead and next slide. There is also polling delivery, and in that mechanism, essentially, the receiver makes a post request to ask for an event and then gets back events, and then has to acknowledge previously received events in the next poll. So those are the ones that exist. Those have been, they're in use, they're deployed. Go ahead and next slide. So there's a couple of new drafts that kind of build on the idea of those two that we are wanting to experiment with. Multi-push and push and poll. Next slide. So in this draft, this one essentially just builds on the existing push delivery mechanism to deliver multiple events in a single post. Sounds pretty straightforward. It is. It's just sending an array of these JSON web tokens. Please excuse my abbreviation of the JSON web tokens in the examples. Next slide. Push poll delivery is more complicated. Essentially, it enables both senders and receivers to both parties, one of which would have been either a sender or receiver, to now be both, essentially doing both mechanisms in one request. So I think I have an example on the next slide. So yeah, the previous examples all are where either a entity plays one role as either a sender or receiver, and this enables both entities to play both roles. So in one post, you can both deliver messages as well as ask for messages and acknowledge previously received messages. Next slide. So that's the quick summary of the functionality described in the drafts. I tried to keep it very high level. There's obviously more details that are in those drafts, but the question is, what should we do with this? Currently, the reason it's here is the push poll draft is currently AD sponsored by Deb, thanks. And then multi-push is right now an individual draft. And when I brought that up to Deb, she suggested to come here because 2 drafts is probably one too many to do as an AD sponsored draft. So I guess the questions, what should we do with this? The options I see are either AD sponsor both drafts. Since there is apparently some more interesting work happening in SEC events, should we restart the group? Maybe it was closed a little bit too prematurely, or any other options anybody can think of.
Okay, thank you. Mark Nottingham is first in the queue.
Mark Nottingham, I feel compelled to remind both authors and area directors that we have an HTTP directorate for reviewing how protocols use HTTP. I would encourage you to use it. I hear there was an AD sponsored draft there as well as this, to avoid having problems later in the process. We encourage early reviews.
Is that relevant to the dispatch question, or is that just a general comment?
It's a general comment, but also, yeah, I see some issues here. I think that they need to be worked through. And in my experience, if we don't have early engagement, it becomes very problematic later on. So that's why I'm bringing it up now.
And just to be extra clear, you see issues with the contents of the drafts?
I see issues with what I saw on the screen.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Josh Cohen.
Hi. So I kind of skimmed the draft, and one thing that wasn't clear to me is like how much of this is about like sending events back and forth versus the security payload. And like another way to say that is like, you know, like is this just like another case of maybe PubSub or other kinds of event systems within the realm of HTTP, in which case there's actually some discussion going on there as well. Or is this really like a security thing that is different?
Yeah, sorry, I guess that was like step 0 of, I should have added at the very beginning, which is that security events are a particular type of payload that describes things that have happened in a system. That's what's being delivered back and forth. So this is essentially, these drafts describe the delivery method for those events, which are then described as signed JSON JOT payloads. So it's not a general PubSub mechanism.
It is not.
Correct. It is specifically for what is called security event tokens in this that were defined in these RFCs.
Okay, but is the information that's encapsulated in those events, like are those separable from the event delivery, meaning that like security events or like, I don't know.
Can we focus on the dispatch question, please?
Sure. Well, that was kind of where I was getting at, which is that like that would kind of depend on where to push it.
Roman.
Hi, Roman Danilio. I want to make a comment as the security area director that closed down SEC events. One of the things being kind of proposed here is that we would want to restart that work. I would observe, if we're going to have that conversation, that I closed SEC event because we had tremendous difficulty finishing the last document where we had to add to the editorial team, and it took many, many months to even close the last kind of deliverable. So if we're talking about reopening that as a dispatch option, I would love to hear about how the dynamics have changed in the work group, because we had tremendous difficulty getting reviews and even finishing kind of the work we had. So this idea of reopening, it would suggest that some kind of physics have changed on the ground in terms of participation.
Noted, thank you.
So this, oh man, this is Deb Cooley. Hi, so remind me what I made you go through before we did this. I think I made a tool go to a bunch of working groups and say, hey, does this fit in your working group? And I think one of those was one of the HTTP working groups who said, well, maybe not.
That sounds familiar to me. I don't remember that whole background. I was brought into this relatively recently.
Yeah, I think it was a
that.
tool. I made a tool do all of that.
I don't know if he's online right now. It's kind of early. But yes, I believe that's what happened.
I don't know. I think that's what happened, though. So we took it to the chairs of the working group. It didn't go to the working group list per se, but it went to the chairs of the working group to say, hey, does this fit here? And I think the consensus was, well, it might, but probably not. I will say that a tool has gotten a number of reviews on the push-pull draft that are posted to the SAG list. So it's possible that some of the proponents have changed in the last year. Whether we can keep that momentum going, I don't know.
So Deb, do you have since you're already sponsoring one of these, do you have a particular, it seems like your opinion is fairly important about whether to sponsor two or not?
Yeah, so my opinion was that if it was going to be two drafts, that we should reopen SEC events. If it was going to be one draft, one lonely draft, I would AD sponsor it. But with two drafts, I thought it was a better idea to open SEC events and get some more community involvement eyes on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. So yeah, so I think the conclusion on that one is probably reopen SEC event, try and understand the dynamics that kind of led to its difficulties at the end of its previous incarnation, and also involve the HTTP directorate. Okay, so Louise is next.
Hey everyone, I'm Louise van der Peet from the TU Delft, and I'm here to discuss a new draft called privacy.txt. And we're looking for discussion about the draft and collaboration. So privacy.txt is based on other .txt standards, in that it's a self-disclosing draft and this one is for more transparency on the web, disclosing information about privacy policies, about cookies, and about privacy actions. So as for the motivation, as everyone knows, all of our data is being collected on the web, and there are many measures for consent, but oftentimes they're not really proper for the user. So here you see two cases where consent is asked. In the first, the consent is basically forced. You can only say, okay, I give my consent. And in the second, it's very difficult to refuse consent for data collection. And this makes it very hard for users to actually take care of their own data and reject their consent. Next, please. So on top of that, there are privacy policies that are supposed to explain what happens to your data. But these are often very hard to get through, very long documents, and research has shown that it even takes more than 40 hours a month if you want to read all of the privacy policies from all of the websites you visit. Next, please. So our draft is privacy.txt. It is a server-side file that is self-disclosed by a website. It's machine readable and it has a single reference point, so it will always be on the website.com/privacy.txt. It includes privacy policy information, actions related to privacy. It includes banner information and cookie information. Next, please. So what is the impact of this draft? Firstly, it can empower users by providing privacy transparency in a more clear way. It can be used in machine-readable formats to make a more clear overview to users what of their data is actually being collected, so that the user can know what happens before they access a website. It can also help websites and businesses comply to privacy regulations. So a privacy.txt file can be created automatically and also be verified automatically for all sorts of privacy regulations. It can facilitate auditing because it's machine readable, and auditing can happen on a more large scale. Next, please. So the hope dispatching outcome is to look for more collaborators and for reviewers on the current document and overall discussion. Thank you.
And of course, you can have collaborators without actually having the work in IETF. We're sort of trying to dispatch to, one of the normal outcomes, like having a BOF or creating a working group or something like that. So do you have a request or a recommendation along those lines?
I don't have a preferred way, so maybe I can get some comments on this.
Okay. Several people in the queue, starting with Mark Nottingham.
Hi, Mark Nottingham, former member of the W3C P3P working group from the shady mists of time way back when. Could you explain how this is different to that work?
Sorry, I didn't hear which work.
P3P.
Oh, yeah. So P3P is mostly about only privacy policies and a machine readable format in that. I think the privacy.txt format is different in that it's a simpler format. So it should be easier for websites to comply to. And because it's already related to other .text standards that are working, like eds.text, it might also be easier to understand.
I don't think that the ease of understanding was the problem that prevented P3P adoption, but thanks.
Thank you.
Did you want to comment on the dispatch question?
I'd want to see more discussion around the problem space and involvement from different stakeholders before dispatching it, I think.
Okay, Ted Hardy.
Ted Hardy, I think the dispatch question is either dispatch with no action or to a full BOF, and for many of the same reasons that I think that Mark was just alluding to. The reason people use robots.txt in the way they currently use it is because there's fundamentally a cooperative relationship. The people who are providing the data want the robots to be able to use it in specific ways, and they are trying to limit their activity in ways that protects their server resources. And because the search engines want to be able to access the content, they want to play nice so they're not blocked in other ways. And that fundamentally cooperative relationship is kind of why robots.txt has worked for the decades it's been in place. I am not convinced by what's in your document now that same cooperative relationship is in place here. And so I think the format issue is not the problem here at all. I think those 40 pages of privacy policies are there because people want specific legal things in place, and they don't necessarily really want them to be easily parsed by the end user. I think it's a feature rather than a bug from an unfortunately antagonistic set of services that do not necessarily want to provide privacy in this way. So I think it would really require a very different framing rather than focusing on the format to convince people that, one, there's enough commonality across jurisdictions that any machine readable format would actually take hold, and two, that the actions which you describe are actually ever likely going to be provided by the vast majority of sites. And I think the other thing is that the extensibility problem here is enormous. The robots.txt was extensible in part because if you didn't understand anything, it was okay not to continue parsing the file. You could just pretend it didn't exist. Where you're here talking about GDPR and other legal frameworks, it is not at all clear that that would be the case. And because they are different in different jurisdictions, I mean, just the US government and EU requirements are different, I think it would be highly problematic.
Can
So I
we
think this would need a lot more work to frame it.
Can we continue that after the meeting, perhaps? I think there's a lot of good comments there, but not
Sorry.
really leading to the dispatch question.
I apologize.
Thanks. PHP.
Yeah, I was going to remind, for anybody here remember Michael Baum and e-terms back in the day, and this was an attempt to there's a thing called Incoterms, which are actually used in international trade. And those are actually a thing that do actually standardize terms. And they're used every day. You know, Net 40 is one of those. So, you know, I think it is possibly practical. P3P, the thing there is, yes, previous things fail, but often they fail because they're proposed too early.
We have a bunch of people in the queue, so could you get to the dispatch recommendation quickly?
Yeah, I think we need to we need to have discussions and maybe a BOF, but think about the pain point. And the pain point for users is going to a website and seeing that, do you accept cookies? If you could find a way of removing the need to click that every single time for users, that would be enough to make this useful.
Okay. Ecker.
Hi. For what it's worth, the reason those banners exist is to force people to click them. If they were easy to auto-reject, that's not the site's interest, which I think brings us back to Ted Hardy's point, which is about the incentive alignment between the user agent and the site, and the user on the site, which is the thing that is not the sort of same alignment structure as being discussed here. In terms of the dispatch thing, I don't think a BOF is going to get us very far. I would suggest perhaps that we offer a mailing list I think Stephen posted this in the chat for people to discuss this. And I think the most critical thing that mailing should attempt to do is to establish that there is a level of interest from sites and from user agents in using this thing. And when we get to the point where there's a level of interest, then it becomes more ripe for standardization. This, as I said earlier, I think in the chat also might be a place to talk about in W3C, which is what did P3P, and where there's been a fair amount of thinking on this topic. But I think it'd be premature to try to have it off either working group forming or non-working group forming.
Okay, thank you. Nick Doty.
Nick Doty, I co-chair the privacy working group at W3C. I appreciate your bringing this work and not giving up on it, even though both P3P and many alternatives have been debated in the past. I think it's useful to hear skepticism about those incentives, but I also think there might be reasons that we should try to see what things have changed or what openness there might be. And certainly those would be relevant questions for people at W3C, and it might be a longer mailing list conversation before BOF, but I would encourage us to both have that skepticism and to actually go through that conversation.
Okay, thank you. Stephen Farrell.
I guess most of what I was saying has been said nearly. I think forming a working group or a BOF is certainly not the right answer. The mailing list, I think, would be a good option, either here or W3C. Clearly, there's a lot of experience around here that would help the proponents of something on such a mailing list, at least as to what to avoid. And again, maybe this is one of these things that if we keep trying and we keep failing until eventually somebody succeeds, and I think that would be good if somebody ever did. So I think have a chat with W3C, and then at that point maybe try and get a mailing list here and or there, discuss and see where it goes.
Okay, and then after the queue closed, Tara, very quickly.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm also supportive of a mailing list. I think some of the conversation about the incentives that's something that could also change over time, and also, yeah, I would like to discuss that more, but I don't think it should be relevant to the dispatch discussion.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I don't think we have time for DKIM 2, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
Can I say like
A couple of words.
DKIM bad, that's 2 words.
So the slides are there. Please have a look. We'd really like to have a working group. There's a lot of interest in this work at the moment. There's a lot of momentum behind it. Unfortunately, we didn't hit the deadline for this because ALLDISPATCH got shortened and they closed the queue a week before when it was supposed to be closed. And so we didn't get in, even though we'd prepared and spent a lot of time getting sign-off. If you look at the co-authors, you'll see they're from large companies who take a long time to get legal sign-off, which is why we couldn't send the work before then. But please do have a look at that. I'm going to ask the area directors for a working group. I believe we're ready for it. We have the momentum behind this that we didn't have for the DKIM replay work. Thanks. Oh yeah, and we'll be talking about this in Mailmate tomorrow if you're interested in coming along.
Do you want to do the summary?
Okay, so we will have the summary of this dispatch session. So for the first one, the standards for size, there will be no AD sponsored, and that will be a focused and narrow group, working group. And the second one, the IETF chair delegate. So I suppose a working group.
Maybe the same one, maybe a different one. We're not sure.
Yeah. And then the DID. So this one, the work would belong to W3C. So that was not in the IETF. And then the ALFA. So that will be a BOF in the security area. So please discuss with the AD first. And then, so the next, that will be a BOF. So either working group forming or non-working group forming, but please have more discussions before to have the BOF. And then the IDMEF V1. So that will be AD sponsored But again, before that, please discuss more with the AD. And then the SAC event, so that will be the AD sponsored for the 2 drafts. And the final one, yeah, so probably we will need to see more discussions. Probably a new mailing list will be created. So please discuss there. And that's it.
All right, we've got half a minute. 2 people in the queue. Tara? Or are you, did I just not drop you from the queue? Okay. Ecker, did you have something new to say?
Yes, I want to clarify what the outcome of the ID, FV2 is. Is there, I did not hear what I would call strong approval for AD sponsorship, and I understand what the AD's position is going to be.
Well, I think it came down as AD sponsorship if we had some evidence of significant use. Is that what others remember? Yes. Okay. And we're at time. Thank you, everyone.